the history of Israel as a nation. And each nation, they do have their own history. Some are written, some are not. But many Eastern countries, the Far Eastern countries, we do have a written history, ancient history. And it's the same. So they are covering like a BC, before Christ, about a couple thousand years of history. And First and Second King, let's go over these two books. So First King, First King is about, it continues the account of the monarchy in Israel. Monarchy means having one king. Take one king and then rule by a king. So they established a monarchy by beginning to they began by setting up Saul as the first king. Then King David becomes the second king, and King Solomon becomes the third king. So we know, these first three kings are important in Israel history. And so these books cover those parts. And the First King continues to talk about this monarchy in Israel and God's involvement. I told you that something that is unique about the history of Israel in the Bible. This is only probably the written record for the history of Israel. And then they understand their story is the story of God working with His people. So that's a basic structure. And some of the old ancient history of, for example, China, Korea, Japan, they do have their gods involved in their ancient history. But when it comes to the history of a kings, at the beginning of the nation, we believe, Korea, Japan, and China, they commonly believe it is begun by God somehow. But once it's established to become a monarchy, meaning that when you begin to have a king, then those stories are written without the concept of God. But history of Israel, all the way through, and each king that is mentioned in the First King, Second King, and in the Chronicles, they deal with God, and it always involves God working with these kings. So that's a uniqueness and a difference in understanding the history of Israel. And so First Kings, Second Kings, these two books deal with this theme of God involving, working with each and every king. And the thing is, God has to say yes to a certain king for him to be a king. And because of that, the priest and prophets, these people takes an important part in designating or inaugurating. Inaugurating means setting the crown over the king. So inauguration is a beginning of official ceremony of that acknowledging the supposed king to be a king. And when we have a new president, we have an inauguration as well. So when they are inaugurated, the priest and the prophet has to say, yes, this is the king God wants to be. So without that, you are not legitimate, you are not legal, you are not officially a king. So first king of Israel was set by Samuel. Samuel was a prophet, actually the prophet of that age. So when there's a certain age in Israel, they do have a top prophet who is the prophet of all the prophets, and he has the saying about the politics and religions and social life. So the prophet and the priest, they do cover not only the religion but daily life and politics. So in the book of Kings, we do see that prophets and priests are involved, becoming the mediator between God and the king. So if the king does not listen to God, then a prophet comes in and say, "You're not listening to God. You're doing it wrong. You're being unrighteous." And then king has a choice whether to listen to the prophet or kill that prophet. So some of the prophets were killed by the king who did not want to listen to God. So those things happen in the history of Israel. And the first and second kings, if you read them, there are those stories of the king going against God and killing priests or prophets, usually the prophets, because they need the priest to bless him. And to do so, king with the power, and they kind of threaten these priests. If you do not do the offerings for me, and I'm going to kill you. And most, probably 99% of priests will listen to the king because they don't want to be killed. And they do the offerings and rituals in the temple for the king. But the prophets, their job is to just go and say the things they hear from God. And if they don't do that, and then they are the right prophets. So the office of prophets or role of prophets, even today, is to say the things that is right in the Bible. So as a Christian, as a believer, we are obligated to function as a prophets within the church and also toward the world who are going against God. Now, second point, it says, after David, his son Solomon. So Solomon ascends the throne of a united kingdom. But this unity only lasts during his reign. So after the Solomon's sons, they fight one another, and then they divide the country. After the third Solomon, the kingdom divides to north and south. The book explores how each subsequent king in Israel and Judah answers God's call, or, as often happens, fails to listen. I just told you that some kings do obey God's call and God's command, God's instruction, and they become a good king. But those who does not listen to God or fail to listen to God, and they fail as a king. And these things are recorded. So the theme in the first and second king always, good king listen to God, and bad king does not listen to God. And because of the king does not listen to God, and they are punished because they have that covenant with God. So that's the main theme that repeats in the first king, and that repeats in the second king as well. And in the second Kings, it carries the historical account of Judah and Israel forward. So there are the two countries, Israel in north and Judah in south. So two different kingdoms with the two different kings. The kings of each nation are judged in the light of their obedience to the covenant with God. So the same thing repeats. So covenant with God is still important for the northern Israel and southern Judah. Even if they are divided into two different kingdoms, they have to listen to God. And this second king is still focusing on the theme of those kings, whether they are obeying God or disobeying God. The reason for the first and second king recorded these things, they have a message for us today, to the believers and Christians. So for Christians, as a church should listen and obey to God. I mean, that's a must. It's a mandate. There's no reason that you say, for this reason, I'm not obeying God. It cannot happen. So if you're a Christian, if you're a Christian church, you are to obey. And if you do not obey, what happens? The same thing happened to the kings of Israel, or the nation of Israel, may happen to you exactly. So those lessons, those messages still valid, meaning it still affects us today. So that when something that is written in the Bible, and even if it's old days, like 2,000 years or 1,000 years ago, if that still applies to us, we say that's a principle. We call it biblical principle. Biblical principle or principles, these are the key to us. That's the message. And when we do the Bible study in a church, what we do is trying to find that biblical principle. It's always true. And it doesn't matter whether you're Chinese, Korean, Japanese, or something else, or whether you live in the 1800 or 1900 or 21st century, the principle always same, because it's principle. And our job as a believer and Christian is to try to find those biblical principles out of the Bible. So when we read the First and Second King, or any books in the Bible for that matter, we are trying to focus on that, the message, the principle, biblical principle, the principle that is in the Bible or from the Bible, and which never changes. So these are the things. And the one biblical principle we find in these, the story of kings, is that the matter of obedience to the covenant God. How do you obey that covenant? How do you follow that covenant? So that's the key. And that principle is same for today, for us. Okay? And third point, ultimately the people of both nations are exiled for this disobedience. They were destroyed by two different world power at the time. One was Babylon, and the other one was Assyria. So these are the two great nations that become so powerful. They invade Israel. they invade Judah and destroy them, and these nations become their part. So invaded, and no more nation, no more government, no more kings. So Babylon and Assyria eat up Israel and Judah. So these two countries are gone. Those two, the kings and kingdoms are gone. And the reason here, the principle is that if you disobey the covenant, if you break the covenant, what happens is you become punished. So God punishes those who disobey the covenant. So same applies to us. So that's the first and second king. Now, when Babylon and Assyria comes and destroys the nation, they also take away Israel people and people of Judah to their countries and take them, and they become diaspora. So diaspora or diaspora is a combination of two words, and these are Greek words. So dia and spora are two Greek words combined, and dia means either broad so dia means this, broad or throughout, broad. And spora originally means seed. And spora means spore. You know the word spore, it means seed. And spora means seed in Greek, and also means spread. It also means scattered. So scattered throughout, scattered broadly. That's the word diaspora. And when we say like a diaspora, or two different pronunciations on this word. You can say diaspora or diaspora. It's because it's a floating word. The English pronunciation is there are two ways to pronounce that word. Either you say diaspora or diaspora. Either way, when we say diaspora, for example, Chinese diaspora, that means Chinese who are scattered and live around the world, outside China. Mm-hmm. And the history of Chinese diaspora is probably as ancient as the Jewish diaspora. And even in Korea, in early Korean history, there are Chinese who moved from China into Korea and settled down and become Koreans. So some of the names, for example, my name also, the last name is a Chinese name, right? So we do have some Chinese root, and that's from Chinese diaspora. And there were also the Koreans from ancient Korea who moved into China and settled down there. And some of the wives of famous Chinese kings, there are Koreans. And then even with Japan, we do have a Japanese population in Chosun era, which is like 500 years ago. And near the Busan, there was a big Japanese town. Same thing happened in Japan. There were a big Korean population in ancient days in Japan. So in every part of the world, they do have this diaspora. So when they were captured by Babylon and Assyria, they had to move. They didn't have choice. I mean, you take you away by military force, and you have to go. So that becomes what we call diaspora Jews or diaspora Jews. So these Jewish people had to move to their own country. They leave Jerusalem. They leave Israel and begin to live in the land of Babylon or Assyria. This is not the first time they had a long history of diaspora, because we know that they lived 400 years in Egypt. So this is a second major exile or diaspora history for Jewish people. And it does have not only a historic significance, but it does have a spiritual meaning and spiritual significance to them. Because again, they live another 400 years as diaspora until Jesus comes back. And then after Jesus was resurrected in around AD 70, they come back as Israel. But officially, it takes 2,500 years for the nation of Israel to come back as a nation, which happened in 1948. So in the year 1948, that's a very important date in the biblical history. So the UN recognized Israel as a nation. At the same year, they recognized Korea as a new government. So same year it happened. But anyway, so 1948, that takes 2,500 years for Israel to become a nation again. So we do find many diaspora Jews in many different nations. For example, you find Jews in Ethiopia. You find the Jews in Russia. Probably every corner of the earth we find the Jews. So that's diaspora history. And the first and second Chronicles, these are the record of this diaspora Jews, how they are scattered and how they lived among the nation of Babylon and Assyria. So First Chronicles, just as the author of Kings had organized and interprets Israel's history to address the needs of the exiled community. So the writer of First Chronicle wrote for the restored community another history. Okay, so basically the First Chronicle, it writes about the needs of the community that is in Babylon and Assyria, and it just reports how they live as diaspora. And also Second Chronicles continues the account of Israel's history with an eye for the restoration of those who had returned from exile. So after about about 100 years later, they were allowed to go back to Israel. And as it happens, there are two key words that you want to remember, especially if you're a Christian. So these are important concepts in understanding the diaspora history, Jewish history. Remnant, that word can be interpreted in two different ways in the Bible. Because of that, it's sometimes confusing when you find that word in the Bible. Remnant, if you are viewing from the point of Israel or Jerusalem, the remnant means those who are left in Jerusalem when Assyria and Babylon took away majority of population to their land to make them slaves. But they left some people who are poor, who are without education. They thought these Babylonians, they are not worth to take. So the lowest class of the population were left in Jerusalem and Israel. So the remnant means those who are left and who were able to avoid capturing the slaves to these lands. But that means they are poor. They are meaningless. Again, remnant in another sense means those who return after 100 years. Majority of them returns. So the Bible, in the Chronicles, it records how many came back from Babylon and Assyria after like 100 years. Even have names and the tribe. That means not all of them in the Babylon or Assyria came back to Israel or Jerusalem. Some of them did not come back because it's already like a fourth generation or fifth generation. So when you go to another country, if it's like a fourth and a fifth generation, for example, the Chinese came to U.S. only as before 1900, year 9. Actually, it's 1800 something when the first Chinese came to United States as the railroad workers. So for Chinese, it's more than 100 years, like a fourth and fifth generation Chinese diaspora are living in America. The same thing for Japanese as well. For Koreans, it's probably usually third generation, and the fourth generation for Hawaiian immigrants. So the earliest Korean immigrants to the United States happens in the early 1900s. So for example, I know about the Korean people. The Hawaiian, fourth generation Korean Hawaiian, they do not speak Korean, most of them. But recently, because of K-pop and all this K-thing, they got kind of interested in learning Korean language. But otherwise, fourth generation Japanese in America, they don't speak no Japanese at all. So that means you lose your own culture. But one thing different for these Jews, they teach their the next generation the language and the Bible. They were taught to memorize the first 5 books in their own language. And they were educated in synagogue. Synagogue means that it's like a Jewish church, right? So every Saturday they will come to synagogue, whether if it's a Babylon or Assyria, they learn their Bible. They were taught. And the parents taught them, and parents told them to speak in Aramaic language or Jewish language in their home. They kept their culture, their religion. Because of the religion, they were able to continue that tradition, that culture. So even after 100 years, most of Jews were able to still speak their own language. They maintain their own religion. So when they come back to Israel and Jerusalem, it was not that difficult for them to live as Jews again. So those returned means they come back from Babylon and Assyria back to Jerusalem and back to Judea, back to Israel. And what happens here is some of them still live in Babylon and Assyria. So those are remnant. Okay? And the implication for us, we are remnant of God. As Christians are remnant of God. That means those who kept the faith in God for even after 100 years. So remnant is a very important concept in understanding Christian religion. Okay? Next book is Ezra. This Ezra, book of Ezra, is a unique book in terms of Ezra is one of those prophets, but this prophet is different because he is in that age of diaspora age. So they are without a nation. They don't have that priest anymore. And they don't have a king. But they still have prophets. And this Ezra was also a scholar of Bible. And what he did is, even without the system, they do not have temple, they do not have a regular priest, they do not have nothing. But they still have that Bible, the Old Testament. And Ezra is a scholar. He is the one who taught the Bible to people. So he's like a Bible teacher. And he teach Bible to people. And one day he kind of opened a big assembly. Assembly meaning coming together. And to teach to whole Israel. So that becomes a revival for the nation. And so that story is important. And let's read that the short summary. The book of Ezra relates how God's covenant people were restored from Babylonian exile to the covenant land as their community, even while continuing under foreign rule. So, they are still under foreign rule, but now they are allowed to have their come back and to have their government. And Ezra is in the center of this returning to Israel. Okay, next, Nehemiah. He is a very important figure in the time of Jewish diaspora. And the story of Nehemiah happens about like 100 years later, 80 to 100 years later, after the destruction of Israel. closely relate to the book of Ezra, Nehemiah chronicles or writes the return of the cupbearer to the king and the challenges he and the other Israelites face in their restored homeland. Nehemiah was a cupbearer of the king of Babylon. A cupbearer is a very high position in that time because you do not trust your wine to someone who cannot trust, because you can put those dangerous toxins or the poison into the wine and kill the king. So that person has to be one who you trust. And see, Nehemiah is a foreigner. I mean, he's a Jew. They know he's a Jew. But they trusted this Nehemiah to be the cupbearer, meaning he takes care of the food, the drinks of the king. And because of that position, he was able to, see the king like almost every day. And he was close, and the king trusted him, and he was loyal, and he was obedient. And one day, he comes to the king and asks, "Can I go back to Jerusalem for a while?" And the king asks, "Why do you want to do that?" And he says, "I'd like to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem." This is a very sensitive thing, because when you say building the wall, that means you want to establish a military force back in the land which the Babylon is occupying. I mean, strategically speaking, that's something against the idea of when you occupy a certain land. But king says, "Okay, you can go." And then he asks, "Can I have some timber, the material to build the wall?" And the king says, "Of course, yes, you can have that." So this is not likely to happen, I mean, with the common sense, but it does happen. And Nehemiah goes back and surveys the wall that's all destroyed, and then he builds that within like 50 days, which is impossible with a human calculation. So he builds the wall, and in the process there's certain things that are happening in the history. But the thing is, Nehemiah takes a very special leadership from God, and he leads his people to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. Later on, because of the wall of Jerusalem is built, they were able to restore the temple. The temple is a symbol for Jewish people. Without temple, they believe they do not have the power, God's power. So to build the temple back, they must build the wall first. So Nehemiah does that, and I mean this is a very interesting story. Even if you don't read the other parts of the Bible, I recommend you to read the Nehemiah. This is like a very textbook for a Christian leadership. And if I teach Christian leadership again sometime, I like to study this book of Nehemiah. And there's one good book written on this Nehemiah leadership, and it's called The Excellence in Leadership. And it's a good book. Anyway, so Nehemiah is the leader, and in the time of Jewish diaspora. Then Esther. Esther is another lady, another book named by a lady's name. There's a Ruth who is not even a Jew, and who was widowed, and who was poor, and Ruth becomes the ancestry of Jesus. Now Esther is another woman character in the Bible, and she is wife of the king of Babylon. So let's read this summary. Esther records the institution of the annual festival of Purim through the historical account of Esther, a Jewish girl who becomes queen of Persia. Actually, not the Babylon, the Assyria later becomes Persia, and saves her people from destruction. So she is the queen. She becomes a queen, and for the Gentile or foreigner to become a king and the queen is not normal. It's rare thing. But because of her character and because of her beauty, she was chosen as the queen of Persia. And what she does, eventually she saves Jewish people from massacre or genocide. Genocide means killing of a certain race. And the Jewish genocide is most known genocide in history. Hitler, in Germany, kills like 6 million Jews, aiming at genocide. He wanted to get rid of Jewish race or the ethnic cleansing. So that genocide happened many times in history of Israel, and this is one of them. So there were many descendants of Jewish people living in Persia, and somehow there was one person who just wanted to get rid of all the Jews, which you may find, I don't know if you think it's easy or difficult. Is it difficult? Okay, let's look at number 1. Before we begin, please write down the right answers, okay? Quiz number 1 says, the name Old Testament, it stands for God's promise about, is it Canaan conquest, or B, Exodus from Egypt, or C, coming Messiah, or D, exile to Babylon? The answer is C. It's about coming Messiah. And number 2, which of the following is not in the Old Testament? And a creation of new universe, birth story of Jesus, story of patriarchs, and the Exodus from Egypt. Answer is B. Birth story is in New Testament. In the New Testament. Number 3, which of the following is not in the Old Testament? A, Acts of Apostles. B, formation of Israel nation. C, fall of 2 kingdoms. And D, story of Jewish kings. The answer is A, the Acts of Apostles. It's also in the New Testament, not in the Old Testament. Number 4, which is not true about the book of Genesis. Book of Genesis. A, it writes about the beginning of all things. B, it shows how to understand the rest of the Bible. C, it speaks about the relationships. D, it was believed to be written by Joshua. The answer is D. Yeah, it is believed to be written by Moses instead of Joshua. Number 5, books of Exodus. Exodus lays foundational theology about names of God. There are several different names of God. B, divine attributes. C, redemption. D, divine laws. E, how God is to be worshipped. Yeah, all these are included in the book of Exodus. So the answer is F, all of the above. Okay.
5 F. 5. Number 5.
Number 5? Yeah, answer is F.
F.
All of the above are the right answers. Number 6, book of Leviticus. Leviticus does not serve as a manual for the regulation for godly kingdom. B, explains how Israelites are to be his holy people. C, explains how to worship him in a holy manner. D, explains how to fight a war against Ammonites. The answer is D. Yeah, it does record about the war, but it doesn't tell you how to fight, usually. Sometimes it does, but not always. Okay, lastly, the true or false. True or false. 7. Exodus describes the history of the Israelites leaving Egypt after slavery, 400 years of slavery. Answer is true. Yeah, it is true. Number 8. Leviticus means concerning the Levites, who are the priests of Israel. The answer is yes, it is true. Number 9. The book of Numbers tells of the murmuring and rebellion of God's people in the wilderness. The answer is true. It is true.
True.
True. Okay, number 10. The book of Numbers records the story of Israel's journey from Mount Sinai to the plains of Moab after Exodus. The answer is true. You got all the answers? Okay. So those who did not mark their attendance yet, their attendance sheets. And also, please note, there's a topic sheet going around, and please make sure that you report your topic that you are going to write the report on. So, anyone missing the attendance? Ready? Good. Someone already finished her report. Attendance? Okay, who's missing the quiz number 1? Anyone didn't have a quiz number 1 last week? So everyone has quiz number 1. Good.
페이지에
All right, we'll continue with today's subject. And, attention, please. We are still on the book of Old Testament, but today we are covering some of the books in the diaspora era, meaning the Jewish people were scattered into Babylon and Assyria. And okay, I'll wait until you guys finish. Okay. All clear? Okay, so Esther, like I said, is a second book named with a girl's name, Ruth and Esther, and she was a queen in the land of Persia, and she is the one who saved her people using her power. Now, going into poetry, we have several, not that many, but several poetry books in the Bible. Because Bible being a form of literature, it does have some poetry. And Psalms. Psalms are 140 some songs in there. And these are the poetry in the form of poetry. Okay, let's read. The Psalms are collected songs and poems that represent centuries worth of praises and prayers to God on a number of themes and circumstances. So, most of the Psalms are written by David the king. King David wrote probably more than half of Psalms. And as you read these Psalms, it's in the form of prayer sometimes. It is in the form of song. And he used, some kind of instruments, the musical instruments, to play these songs. And some are very popular songs among the Israelites or Jews. And some are short, and some are pretty long. And one thing that I kind of the song, the Psalms, they have a certain way of writing their poetry. I think, in our culture, in the Asian culture, especially who are using the Chinese characters, we do have a certain format, like 4 letters repeating four letters and goes down. So there are certain form of poetry in each culture, and they have certain rules of writing their poetry. So it is interesting. You cannot see that in the English translation, but in original Hebrew, they do have a certain rules, and they follow that instruction. So that's just for your information. And the second point, the Psalms are impassioned, vivid, and concrete. They are rich in images and simile and metaphor. Simile and metaphor is of saying things, kind of, using a certain image or a certain, not exactly, but kind of reflect on it. So it is interesting to read some of Psalms. And many Psalms are comforting, and you can find yourself agreeing to these Psalms because it comes out of heart. It's not a story. It writes about your feelings toward God, or sometimes your dissatisfaction or anger against God, it is there. So Psalm is a very kind of interesting literature in the Bible that you want to read. And it's not so much, you cannot say it's so religious, but it does. All the Psalms have the theme of God in there. Okay. Then Song of Solomon. This is pretty interesting piece of literature in the Bible. It does talk about love between man and woman. So some of the writings in this the Song of Solomon can be R-rated, meaning it's restricted. The movies have 19, 14, and R rate. And some of the material in Song of Solomon is very explicit sexually, and it talks about man and woman as a sexual relationship, and how man flirts with a woman, and these things are in there. So it's an interesting piece of literature, and it's like a love song. And if you have some good hint when you write a love letter to someone, there's some good material that you can quote. So point 1, in ancient Israel, everything human came to expression in words: reverence, gratitude, anger, sorrow, suffering, trust, friendship, and commitment. And those topics, those things are in there in the Song of Solomon. In the Song of Solomon, it is love that finds words, inspired words that disclose its exquisite charm and the beauty as one of God's choicest gifts. So it says the love between man and woman, husband and wife, is a gift from God. So it praises that sexual relationship and attractions and beauty of woman, and those things that are there. So this is a very interesting piece of work in the Bible. Lamentation. Lamentation is one book that kind of, Lamentation, and later I'll talk about Ecclesiastes. Those two books are pretty kind of dark. It's sad. There's that feeling of sadness and grief in there, and the sorrow. So the main, the color of that literature, lamentation, is sadness, and that's the grief and sorrow. So it says, lamentation consists of a series of poetic and powerful laments over the destruction of Jerusalem, the royal city of Lord's kingdom, in 586 BC. So this is the year that Babylon came in and destroyed the temple and Jerusalem. And as they reflect on that event, they kind of write it sad. Because when your city and your nation is destroyed, the feeling, of course, is sorrow and darkness and despair. Despair meaning you do not have any more hope. So that's kind of a feeling in that literature. So if you want to find something that is sad and dark in the Bible, and this is a literature that you want to go in and read. So they lament or they talk about sadness. Lament means talking or speaking of sadness or feeling of sadness. So it's about being sad, being in despair, and without hope. So lamentation is kind of literature that written by diaspora Jews. So without a country, without a nation, and if you have I mean, if you are your nation, especially your nation, if your nation had experienced the time that you did not have a country anymore or government, and you know the feeling. And of course, I do not know much about other nations, but Korea and China, we do have those colonial times and without a nation or government. And the literatures that were produced during that time, pretty much same as those Lamentations. And you can compare that those literatures to Lamentation, pretty much similar feeling. Okay, then we have something called wisdom literature in the Bible, wisdom literature. Even though you are not a Christian, these books, wisdom literatures are pretty good. I mean, it gives some guidance to your life. And it talks about that wisdom and philosophy. So when you think about who you are, I mean, what you need to do as a person, and if you are going through some difficult times, Psalm and these wisdom literatures are good books to read, even if you are not a Christian. And some of the wisdom literatures, Job or Job. This is again a unique book. I told you that this is the oldest book in the Bible, the very first one. I mean, even older than Genesis. Those first five books of Bible, they are old, but this is older.